Samsung's decision to put the brakes on the Galaxy Fold is not surprising considering what's been going on. So the big question now, of course, is what happens next? Adrian Kingsley-Hughes is joining us here with ZDNet. Adrian, of course, you've been writing a lot about this. And, Samsung is saying, okay, we're going to take our time now to strengthen the display on the Galaxy Fold. What's your take on that?
Well, I think this really now depends. Are they talking about a total back to the drawing board redesign of the Fold? Or are they talking about let's try and patch up this design and salvage what we've done so far? I think iFixit had a look at the Fold the other day, and in their teardown, they described the design as fundamentally fragile, because as we've tended to move with smartphones to being able to seal out dirt and dust and stuff that gets into them, this design by virtue has an awful lot of entry points for dust and debris to get into it. It even has two gaps on top and bottom of the display that are about 7mm in size, which can allow really big chunks into the system. So it's hard. I think they've done the right thing to put the brakes on the launch at the moment, because I don't think it was looking very good. But as to what happens next, I think it just depends how much they want to get their money out of it. If they're going to rush out now with some kind of let's improve on the screen protector, let's maybe patch up some of the holes, maybe they'll be willing to kind of take the fall on any returns on that, any kind of warranty issues. But whether customers are going to be willing to spend $2,000 on a smartphone that seems that fragile, I think that's going to be the real test.
Yeah, that will cause some pause for people, certainly. And do you have any thoughts, Adrian, on the fact that, with design flaws this serious, this came down to the 11th hour, just days before the rollout, that they pulled the plug? Why do you think it took them so long?
Well, in part, I was pondering this the other day. How well was this setup designed? I mean, we all know that smartphones spend an awful lot of time being designed in air-conditioned labs, and then they come out into the real world where there's dirt and dust and people bend things different to how robots might bend things. But this does seem to be a very compromised design, and that would suggest maybe that it's been much more rushed out than we've seen in previous designs. It is very new, it is very experimental. That has to be borne in mind, but also it's $2,000, and if you're going to put that kind of money down on something, these kind of issues don't look good. And Samsung is not being very straight as to what the real issue here is.
Yeah, and in terms of how this looks and for PR purposes for Samsung, how do you think, or what's a lot of the talk surrounding this in terms of what this does or what it says about Samsung?
Well, I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, I think Samsung has been held to a different standard to Apple. If this was an Apple design and this had happened to an Apple product this early on in the cycle, I think people would be calling for heads to roll. Because it's Samsung, it's almost, the feeling is, well, Samsung's a much smaller company. We're supposed to kind of almost expect that things are going to go wrong. It's a new design. Let's give it some time. But that's people who like to play with tech who are saying this. Whether, again, it's coming down to, this is a $2,000 smartphone. You can buy a lot of hardware for $2,000, and you can buy a lot of hardware that lasts a lot longer than a day for $2,000. I think if Samsung came out and said, yep, this is the problem here, we've strengthened this area, that area here, and we're confident that it works now, that might be different. But to start blaming people on peeling things that weren't supposed to be peeled, even though they looked like they were supposed to be peeled, and then having big holes in this case and in the hinge that allowed debris to get into it that seemingly can damage it very easily, I think it needs to kind of explain what the rationale behind this design was and what actually went wrong. And only Samsung can really put people's minds at ease that they fixed the problem.
Right. And before we wrap up here, Adrian, in terms of how we all have gotten a little bored, it seems, with cell phones, or they've all kind of been the same, in the last couple of years. So companies looking for that next best thing, something with a real wow factor. Do you think that this was something that in theory sounded great, but is going to be really hard to pull off?
I think in theory it sounds great, yeah. And in practice, I think it's going to be very hard to pull off. While foldable displays that I've seen the specifications from seem to be very good for 10,000 folds, 20,000 folds, that's folding that's carried out under lab conditions with robots folding them in exactly the same way. When they get into the hands of you and me, we're not that careful with things. That's why even Apple products mostly end up in some kind of crazy rugged protector, because we're not as careful as things are, as people in labs are. And I think it's quite possible that they underestimated how harsh people are on new designs and didn't really accommodate for that real world use. And there is this kind of rush to want to be first with something. I know that immediately when Samsung announced the Galaxy Fold, everybody was like, why didn't Apple do this first? Why didn't Apple do this first? Well, maybe this is why Apple didn't do it first. I made the parallels with Apple canceling the AirPower charger. Yes, it was a black eye for Apple, but it's far better than releasing a product that seems flaky and then having to pull back dates, and then nobody knows where anything stands. So at the end of the day, being first is not necessarily best.
Yeah, certainly with this situation here, we're seeing that, Adrian. All right, well, we appreciate your thoughts on this. It's going to be really interesting to see if and when the Fold is ever rolled out. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to stay with ZDNet.